The mud squelched under my boots as I made my way deeper into the pine forest. The late October air hung heavy with moisture, creating a ghostly veil of fog between the trees. I'd been hiking these trails for years, but something felt different today. The usual weekend hikers were nowhere to be seen, leaving me alone with the hollow sound of wind through bare branches. I paused at the junction where the main trail split into two paths. The wooden marker was more weathered than I remembered, its arrow pointing toward Fuller's Ridge barely legible under a thick coating of moss. I pulled out my phone to check the trail map, but the signal bars mocked me with their absence. Not that I needed it. I knew these paths like the back of my hand. Still, that nagging feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. About a mile up the trail, something caught my eye. A red backpack lay on its side just off the path, its contents spilled across the damp ground. A water bottle, granola bar wrappers, and a crumpled map created a disturbing scene of abandonment. I approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello, is anyone there?" Only the whisper of wind answered back. My heart nearly stopped when I spotted the torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush nearby. The red cotton was streaked with something darker, something that made my stomach turn. Small droplets of the same dark substance stained the leaves below. I took a step back, my mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. The old ranger station appeared through the trees, its windows dark and uninviting. I knew it had been abandoned for years, but it was my best chance at finding help, or at least a working emergency radio. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I climbed onto the porch, dried leaves crunching beneath my feet. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, illuminating overturned furniture and scattered papers. The radio equipment lay in pieces on the floor, its wires torn out like entrails. Something violent had happened here, and recently, the dust on the scattered items hadn't yet settled. That's when I noticed the marks on the wall. Deep gouges ran from ceiling to floor, as if something or someone had tried to claw their way out. They looked fresh, the exposed wood still light in color. A sound from outside made me freeze, the distinct crack of a branch breaking under weight. Moving to the window, I spotted something I hadn't noticed before, a trail camera mounted on a nearby tree. Its lens was cracked, and a dark smear across its housing made my blood run cold. I had to know what it had captured. With trembling hands, I retrieved the memory card, thankful I had brought my tablet with its card reader. The footage started normally enough: deer, raccoons, the usual forest residents. Then came the images from 3 days ago. A hiker passing by, looking nervous, checking over their shoulder repeatedly. The timestamp showed 6:42 p.m. The next image, taken just 2 minutes later, showed the same scene, but the hiker was running. The final image before the camera stopped working made my heart skip several beats. A dark figure, hunched and massive, moving with inhuman speed toward the fleeing hiker. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows through the trees. I knew I had to get out of there fast. The main trail would take too long. I needed a shortcut. The old maintenance road that connected to the highway was my best bet, even though it hadn't been used in years. I moved as quickly and quietly as possible down the overgrown road, ducking under fallen trees and pushing through thick undergrowth. The sound of my own breathing seemed too loud in the growing darkness. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Then I saw them. Tracks in the mud. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, too large to be a bear, with strange elongated toes and deep impressions that suggested immense weight. They were fresh, water still seeping into the depressions. Whatever made them was close. The distant sound of a car on the highway gave me hope. I was close. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about the noise I made. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly as I ran, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to dance and reach for me. I burst out onto the highway near a mangled guardrail, gasping for breath. A passing truck driver saw my frantic waving and stopped to help. As I climbed into the cab, I could have sworn I heard a low, rumbling growl from the tree line, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The police found more backpacks the next day, 6 in total, along with torn clothing and broken cameras. They blamed it on a bear, said it must have been protecting its territory. They closed the trails for the season and increased patrols. But I know what I saw in that trail camera footage. I know that no bear makes tracks like that, moves like that, hunts like that. The trails reopened the following spring. New cameras were installed, better emergency radio systems put in place. But I'll never go back there. Some things are better left alone in the deep woods, where shadows move differently, and the line between predator and prey becomes terrifyingly unclear. Sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we imagine in the dark. They're the ones we refuse to believe exist, even when the evidence is right in front of us. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson as I started my hike through Devil's Gate Canyon. The forecast had promised clear skies, but dark clouds were already gathering on the horizon. I'd been planning this solo photography trip for months, determined to capture the legendary rock formations in perfect morning light. The first warning sign appeared 2 miles in, crude symbols carved into the red rock wall. They weren't the typical petroglyphs tourists came to photograph. These looked newer, deeper, almost mechanical in their precision. My fingers traced the edges of a particularly intricate pattern, finding the grooves unnaturally smooth. Around the next bend, I found the research station. Equipment lay scattered across the sand, a broken tripod, weather-worn notebooks, and sophisticated measuring devices I didn't recognize. A University of Arizona flag fluttered weakly from a bent pole. According to the ranger station's bulletin board, no research teams were supposed to be in the area. The weather monitoring station stood like a broken sentinel, its solar panels cracked and hanging by frayed cables. The digital display flickered with impossible readings: atmospheric pressure far below desert norm, electromagnetic activity off the charts. A logbook in the station's cabinet had entries stopping abruptly 3 weeks ago. The dead vegetation formed a perfect circle, 30 feet in diameter. Every plant within its boundary was brown and desiccated, while those outside remained desert healthy. Even the cacti had shriveled into grotesque shapes, their internal structure somehow collapsed. The border between dead and living was impossibly precise. Near the circle's edge, I found core samples spilled from their protective tubes. The rock cylinders contained crystalline formations I'd never seen before, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. One sample had a handwritten label, Anomaly Site 7, highly unstable, do not disturb. The research notes I found made little sense. Pages of complex equations and diagrams, references to spatial anomalies and gravitational lensing. One phrase appeared repeatedly, circled in red: it's changing the fundamental constants. The last entry was a hastily scrawled warning: site expanding, rate increasing, must evacuate. The survey markers told a terrifying story. Each metal stake, driven deep into the desert floor, was bent at a different angle, all pointing away from the circle's center. The ground around them was disturbed, as if the very earth had shifted. My compass needle spun wildly when I held it near them. The storm clouds had taken on an unnatural greenish tinge. Lightning flickered within them, but without thunder, the silence more unsettling than any sound. The air felt thick, heavy with static electricity that made my hair stand on end. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in minutes. That's when I noticed the rocks themselves were wrong. The layers in the canyon walls, laid down over millions of years, began to bend and twist before my eyes. Not rapidly, but slowly, inexorably, like taffy being pulled by an invisible force. The ground beneath my feet developed hairline cracks in geometric patterns. My GPS went haywire, showing coordinates that changed by hundreds of miles in seconds. The altimeter reading fluctuated between sea level and 20,000 feet. Even my phone's compass app showed me spinning in impossible directions while I stood perfectly still. The air grew harder to breathe, as if its composition was changing. The trail ahead began to fragment, breaking apart into geometric shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. The very fabric of space seemed to be unraveling. I turned to retreat, only to find the path behind me transforming as well. The dead zone was expanding, and I was trapped inside it. My salvation came in the form of a search and rescue helicopter, its searchlight cutting through the strange storm above. They'd been looking for the missing research team and spotted my emergency signal. As they pulled me up on the rescue line, I watched the expanding dead zone below, its perfect circular shape now visible from above. The military quarantined the entire canyon the next day. They called it a geological instability zone, but their response told a different story. Hazmat teams, specialized equipment, and more PhDs than I'd ever seen in one place. The official story blamed underground gas deposits and unusual mineral formations. Months later, I obtained a classified satellite image through a journalist contact. It showed the dead zone as a perfect black circle, now 3 miles in diameter and growing. The photograph was marked with technical annotations I didn't understand and a simple warning: event horizon expanding at geometric rate. I watch the news now, noting the increased activity at observatories worldwide. The scientific community seems focused on that patch of desert sky, though they won't say why. Sometimes on clear nights, I look up and wonder if what I encountered wasn't something coming down from above, but rather something reaching up from deep within the earth, something that had been waiting in those ancient rocks all along. The old railroad tunnel loomed before me, its mouth half hidden by decades of overgrowth. Urban explorers online had been buzzing about this hidden gem, a 3-mile passage cutting straight through Black Ridge Mountain. The state had abandoned it in the 70s, leaving behind a perfectly preserved piece of railroad history, and according to fellow hikers, some of the best underground photography opportunities on the East Coast. Just inside the entrance, something caught my eye: a vintage Nikon F2, its metal body corroded but still recognizable, half buried in wet leaves. Next to it lay a tripod, several rolls of film, and a professional-grade light meter. The equipment looked expensive. No photographer would abandon it willingly. Deeper in, I found maintenance tools laid out in an unsettling pattern: wrenches, hammers, and pickaxes arranged in a precise circular formation. Each tool was ancient, caked with rust, yet their placement felt deliberate and recent. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed they all pointed toward the darkness ahead. The tunnel walls held a strange code, numbers carved into the concrete at regular intervals, accompanied by chalk markings that looked fresh. 27 days, 23 days, 19 days, a countdown of sorts, growing smaller as the markings proceeded deeper into the tunnel. Below each number, a tally of names had been scratched, the list growing longer with each marking. The official maps showed this as a simple railroad tunnel, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Mining equipment littered the ground: core samplers, geological hammers, modern LED lanterns with shattered lenses. A yellow hard hat bearing the logo Black Ridge Mining Co. lay crushed, as if stepped on by something massive. The ceiling caught my attention next. Patches of something organic grew there. Not the usual tunnel mold, but something that seemed to pulse with a faint bluish glow. The growth followed the seams where water seeped through, forming patterns that reminded me of circuit boards. I took samples, careful not to let any of the dripping water touch my skin. A partial collapse blocked most of the tunnel ahead. The rails were twisted like pretzels, bent upward as if by tremendous force from below. Emergency lights had been mounted recently, their batteries still fresh enough to cast weak red glows through the dusty air. Someone had been here, studying something. Behind the collapse, I discovered a makeshift research station. Seismic monitors lay smashed, their displays frozen on impossible readings. Laptops sat on folding tables, their screens cracked but still displaying graphs and charts. One showed a pattern of deep underground movements, growing more frequent over time. A digital audio recorder caught my attention. Its display showed a waveform pattern unlike anything I'd seen before. Not the sharp peaks of tunnel echoes or dripping water, but long, undulating waves that made my head hurt to look at. The device's warning indicator flashed red, frequency outside measurable range. The wooden railroad ties had been transformed. Crystalline structures grew through them, not like normal mineral deposits, but in geometric patterns that defied natural formation. They seemed to grow even as I watched, tiny crackling sounds marking their advance across the wood's surface. A thermal imaging camera had been left running, its screen cracked but functional. The heat map showed something massive moving deep within the mountain's core. Regular pulses of warmth spreading outward through the rock like a heartbeat. The timestamp showed the intervals between pulses growing shorter. Hidden under a fallen section of timber, I found a waterproof case containing documents, government warnings, geological surveys, and incident reports dating back decades. The word containment appeared repeatedly, along with references to something called Project Substratum. The most recent report was marked with yesterday's date. The floor began to crack beneath my feet, hairline fractures spreading in spiral patterns. Something dark pulsed in the depths, pushing upward through the concrete. The air grew thick with an acrid smell, and my skin tingled as if exposed to static electricity. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. A motion sensor unit screamed to life, its display lighting up with proximity alerts. Multiple signatures approached from below, moving through solid rock as if it were water. The readings made no sense, objects too large to fit through the cracks, yet somehow squeezing through. I ran. The tunnel's exit appeared as a tiny dot of daylight, impossibly far away. Emergency strobe lights suddenly activated along the walls, filling the passage with strobing red light. A klaxon began to wail, not the simple alarm of a motion detector, but the complex alert pattern of a government containment system. The government response came swiftly. Hazmat teams, geological survey units, military personnel, all converging on the tunnel within hours. They contained the site, but couldn't contain the truth. The mountain had been hiding something, incubating it for decades in the depths of abandoned mines and forgotten tunnels. Months later, I still monitor the news about Black Ridge Mountain. The official story claims unstable mine shafts and dangerous gas pockets, but satellite thermal imaging tells a different story. Something grows in the depths, spreading through old tunnels and creating new ones, transforming the rock itself into something else. The countdown continues, and I can't help but wonder, what happens when it reaches zero?